Alright, so welcome to Module 9 of the Tribal Data Toolbox training, and in this module we're going to go over how to generate reports and charts with the toolbox. The way to get to the form where the reports and charts are located is to go ahead and click on the continuous or meteorological data fast track, and now we select the third option, which is the reports and charts, because we worked through option 1 and option 2 in our previous modules. So we're going to start by clicking on Reports and Charts, and that opens this new and exciting form in the toolbox. And we saw this briefly in the previous module where we worked on final data validation, and we looked at the chart hourly concentration right here. But in this module, we are going to go over many different charts and reports that you can generate with the toolbox in detail. So just a couple of points to make before we start. The charts that you generate with the toolbox allow you to view concentration data over time and compare. It also allows you to compare your data with meteorological data if you have imported meteorological data into the toolbox. And just remember that the charts and the reports do include flagged data. So if you flag the data and you've not yet invalidated the data, those data are still going to be in the reports and charts. Let's say you have an error of -6999 and you haven't invalidated that data yet. That's going to show up in the reports and charts, and you probably don't want that. So if you see those highly negative or very, very positive numbers like 9999, you're probably going to want to go back to the final data validation step. We're going to start off with this top part of the form here where it says input required. So what we need to do is we need to tell the toolbox what data we want to look at in our reports and charts. So I'm going to start by looking at my ozone data. So I'm going to select my site ID where my ozone sampler is located at, and that's site S46. And the sampler is INO3. The pollutant is ozone. And in the sampling year box, I have two different sampling years. So I have 2013 and 2015. That's because my PM 2.5 data was in 2015. And my ozone data is in 2013. So I'm going to select 2013, and the range is automatically populated by the toolbox. And it populates that value based on data archive tables. So if you've archived multiple data imports, this would show us the beginning date and the end date for that entire archive table. So since I've only imported 2 weeks worth of data into the toolbox, this range only shows August 8th through August 22nd, because that was the range that corresponds with my import. Oh, I also want to note before we go on that you can enter dates that aren't within the range of this sampling year. So let's say that you wanted to look at data spanning 2013 and 2014. So you can just select this and type over it if you have data that you want to look at that's not within 2013, that's within 2014 instead. Or your QC data. So your QC data might not have been within this range, like you did a QC check on 8/7. If you want to see that QC check on 8/7, you could type that in as well. So that's flexible with these dates. And now below the date range is this button that says Add Temporary Zero Value Pollutant Records for Data Gaps in this range. I'm a little bit confused by this button, so I want to open up the SOP and see what I can find about this button. So I'll do that by clicking here for help file. And now I'm going to scroll through this help file and see what I can find about that button. So right at the bottom of the page here, there's a little note about the temporary zero value pollutant records button. And that goes on into the next page. So I'm going to read that and let's see what it says. So from this little part of the SOP, I learned that this button gap fills for missing date times in pollutant concentration data for the range selected. So for example, if my data logger shut down and it did not log several hours of data, the toolbox can temporarily add zero value records with a qualifier code or a flag of GP to the monitoring data so that these dates times are shown in the reports and charts. So if you have missing data, like your data logger is not working for some reason, it's very useful to use this step, especially for your charts. So we're going to demonstrate that when we look at our PM 2.5 data. And also, once you close this form in the toolbox removes those gaps that it added. So it's not like it's adding these permanently to your data file, it's just adding them for your reports and charts.
One thing to keep in mind is that with the date range, you may be looking at dates that are outside what the toolbox thinks the date range is, especially if you've entered quality control data into the toolbox. So just check the date range. You may want to adjust that. It will automatically populate for what it thinks you're looking for as the data in that particular year. You can see that there are 3 panels. On the leftmost panel, we've got the quality control reports and charts, and the buttons are organized so that the buttons that begin with the word report produce a report. The buttons that begin with the word chart produce a chart. So we're going to start off by looking at the options in the leftmost panel here that are quality control reports and charts. So you remember that earlier in a previous video we entered quality control results including zero checks. So we recorded what the analyzer response to the zero gas was several times. We also looked at what used to be called precision checks and now are called 1-point QC checks, and how our analyzer responded to the known calibrator gas of, I think it was 90 parts per billion. And you could see that if you build up every 2 weeks a year's worth of quality control checks, it's kind of hard to go through them and detect any trends, and that's where the toolbox really helps you, is being able to plot your data over time and look at trends. So obviously if you hadn't entered any of that data into the quality control form that we demonstrated in a previous video, you wouldn't be able to use any of these buttons in this leftmost panel. Just to give you a preview, the middle panel is where you can do some great charting of pollutant data versus meteorological data, and that's super useful to look at trends over time and perhaps what might be associated with different pollutant concentrations in terms of the meteorological parameters that you're monitoring for. And obviously you have to have imported metadata in order for these to be useful for you. And in the right hand area is an area we don't talk about very much, which is the ozone calculations, and those are only applicable for a full 3 years worth of data. These are the design value calculations where the toolbox can calculate based upon your data whether your site is in attainment or not in attainment, just looking at the data alone and not any of the quality control measurements or MPAP audits that you also have to do to have your data be comparable against the NACs. But we've only imported 2 weeks worth of data, so that panel is not useful for us.